Hi, and welcome back to this Monday edition of Focal Point on AFR Talk. I am your congenial, convivial host, Brian Fisher. Great to have you on board and in the conversation with us. And we do want to talk about this Connecticut massacre, and I want to spend a little bit of time. I've got a column I've written. It'll be up at rightlyconcerned.com before too long, explaining in a little more detail some of my thinking about the spiritual dimensions of this tragedy. And I want to walk you through some of the content of that. It's interesting to note as we get into this conversation that the worst school massacre in U.S. history did not involve guns. Now, the left is on a relentless crusade, and we predicted this before the election, that if President Obama was reelected, that the Democrats were going to come after our guns. President Obama, will play a soundbite here in a minute. President Obama alluding to that. We've got some number of other soundbites where liberal politicians, they're in position to influence legislation along this line, want to ban guns, or at least start with semi-automatic weapons, which are nothing more than hunting rifles and handguns. If you have a gun with a clip, that is a semi-automatic weapon. If you have a rifle with a clip, even if it's a hunting rifle, that is an assault weapon. Even though you use it for hunting and for self-defense, it is called an assault weapon. So the left is able to kind of spook people by using the word assault. If you use the word hunting rifle, then everybody says, okay, no big deal, people need to hunt. So we just ought to call them hunting rifles. That's what these things are. They're hunting rifles. But they want to ban hunting rifles, even though it's just one squeeze per round. You can't fire off a multiplicity of rounds by holding the trigger down one time. That's an automatic weapon. These are semi-automatic, meaning that you one click, one pull of the trigger finger, and you got one round ejected. But the worst school massacre in history did not, as a matter of fact, involve guns. This goes all the way back to 1927. 45 people died as an alarm clock detonated a 500-pound dynamite and pyritol bomb that a guy by the name of Kehoe had hidden in the north end of a school basement. So the full death toll was 45 dead. That was back in 1927. Now, one of the things that happened over the weekend, as I tweeted and as I talked on this program, is the left-wing media picked up on what I had said and ran with it, and it got absolutely crazy nuts there, and it's been that way all weekend. I've been tied up dealing with some of the blowback and the fallout from the reaction to what I said on Friday. This morning, I had very little time to put directly into show prep because I've been dealing with all of the blowback that's come. And I want to play for you the soundbite that was posted on Friday and circulated. This is clip one, Rob. And it's about 2 minutes and 12 seconds or something like that, so it's not long, but this is a clip of what I had to say on Friday. If you were listening on Friday, you heard me say this. Now, Mediate, which is a website that monitors left-wing media, they described my remarks as shockingly arrogant, immoral, and insensitive. Here's how the line reads that they used to introduce this soundbite. His shockingly arrogant, immoral, and insensitive comments sent shockwaves through internet media. Some of the calls I got this morning were from people who had seen how I had been portrayed and labeled in the media, even though my words had been grossly distorted. And as I talked with this latest caller, probably a half-hour phone conversation, she's from a very prominent family in Republican circles, activist circles, even with connections to the Romney campaign. I won't give you the name, but it's a very prominent family in Republican circles. And so I wanted to take some time with her to sort of walk through this whole issue with her. And as I explained to her what I had said on Friday, she hadn't heard what I'd said. She'd just seen the headlines, how I'd been demonized and vilified in the media. And I gently chastised her and I said, you're doing what a lot of conservatives do. That is that you don't believe anything that you read or see in the mainstream media unless they say it about a fellow conservative, and then you believe every single word they say. And that's the trap that you've fallen into here. So here are the comments that I had made on Friday, and we're going to open up the phone lines early today. And we'll talk about this Connecticut shooting just as long as you would like to talk about it. Got a number of different facets of this that we are going to explore together on the program today, and I'll set the table with some of the remarks from my column. But let's listen first of all to the comments that I spoke on Friday. And again, I want you to call in, and do you agree? Do you agree with the mainstream media that these comments were shockingly arrogant, immoral, and insensitive? Let's listen. You know, the question's going to come up, well, where was God? I thought God cared about the little children. God protected the little children. Where was God when all this went down? And here's the bottom line. God is not going to go where he's not wanted. Now, we have spent since 1962, we're 50 years into this now, we have spent 50 years telling God to get lost. Telling God we do not want you in our schools. We don't want to pray to you in our schools. We don't want to pray to you before football games. We don't want to pray to you at graduation. We don't want anybody talking about you in a graduation speech. We don't want anybody referring to you. We don't want your word read in our schools. So in 1962, we kicked prayer out of the schools. In 1963, we kicked the word of God out of schools. In 1980, we kicked the Ten Commandments out of schools. We've kicked God out of our public school system. And I think God would say to us, hey, I'll be glad to protect your children, but you got to invite me back into your world first. I'm not going to go where I'm not wanted. I am a gentleman. You know, I think back when I was in elementary school, we had prayer in schools, and we didn't need guns. I'm going to repeat that. Back when we had prayer, the Bible, and the Ten Commandments in schools, we did not need guns. So what I'm going to suggest to you is the ultimate solution here is not the Second Amendment, but the First Amendment that guarantees, protects the free exercise of religion. It's time to get a little bit of that free exercise of religion back into our public schools. And maybe it's time for some school boards and administrators to say, look, we don't care. The lives of our children are just too important to us. We are going to pray in our schools. At the beginning of the day, we're going to pray for protection. And I don't care what the Supreme Court says. I don't care what anybody says. Our children are too important to us to leave them vulnerable without asking God for his help and for his protection. Okay, so those are comments that the left-wing media, the mainstream media, says are shockingly arrogant, immoral, and insensitive. I'd like to get your take on it. Now, the interesting thing was, I'll go back to my office after the program, after these comments have aired, and I have no idea about the firestorm that's about to start. I had no idea, because I have no control over who listens to the program. I have no control over who posts stuff on the web. And so I don't try to get people to listen or pay attention. That's completely up to them. My goal is simply to declare the truth and to educate and to inform and to mobilize. And what happens with what I verbalize, that's completely out of my control, so I don't worry about that. So I had no idea that this firestorm was about to descend. And I'm in my office responding to some email and doing show prep for Monday, because I start right after this program is over. I start prepping for the next program, when I noticed that Mike Huckabee was on the Neil Cavuto program, and I have Fox News on in the background to kind of monitor developing news. I have the closed caption on there because I'm not distracted by the noise, and so I'll glance at it every once in a while just to see who is talking, and then if it's somebody I think I want to listen to for whatever reason, then I'll unmute the sound and be able to listen to it. And here was Mike Huckabee on Neil Cavuto, and see if you can detect any difference between what I said 2 hours prior to this and what Mike Huckabee said on Neil Cavuto, Fox News. Let's listen.
How could God let this happen?
Well, it's an interesting thing. We ask why there's violence in our schools, but we've systematically removed God from our schools. Should we be so surprised that schools would become a place of carnage because we've made it a place where we don't want to talk about eternity, life, what responsibility means, accountability, that we're not just going to have to be accountable to the police if they catch us, but one day we stand before a holy God in judgment. If we don't believe that, then we don't fear that. And so I sometimes, when people say, why did God let it happen, God wasn't armed. He didn't go to the school. but God will be there in the form of a lot of people with hugs and with therapy and a whole lot of ways in which I think he will be involved in the aftermath. Maybe we ought to let him in on the front end and we wouldn't have to call him to show up when it's all said and done and at the back end.
That's Governor Mike Huckabee, it seems to me, saying exactly the same thing that I was saying. So if my comments were shockingly arrogant, immoral, and insensitive, and certainly the governor's were, and I did not find them shockingly arrogant, immoral, or insensitive at all. In fact, I thought they were right on point. And it was interesting, as the weekend progressed, the left connected me with Governor Huckabee and attacked us both at once, sending the same vitriolic, venomous tweets to his Twitter account and to mine. All weekend it was like that. And most of what they said, I cannot even read to you on air because this is a family radio talk network. So you'll have to take my word for it, but it was vile, profane, disgusting. You would be appalled at some of the things that people feel free to say to another human being on Twitter. And these things were being said all weekend long. So Governor Huckabee and I both coming out and saying, look, we think there's a larger issue here, and it has to do with whether we are properly acknowledging God in our public school system. Now, I want to play one. Well, let's see. I don't know if we have time to play clip 3. Do we have time, Rob, before? No, I don't think we do. Better save that for after the break. We're going to play some sound bites as the program unfolds that deal with the issue of guns in public schools. When we come out of the break, I'm going to kind of walk you through some of the content that's in my column today, and then we'll go to sound bites and to phone calls. 888-589-8840 is the number, 888-589-8840. You know, one of the issues that came up when I was talking with this one woman from this Republican family this morning is she's saying, look, timing is everything, and your timing was bad here. Your timing was awful. Your timing was off. You should have waited for 2 weeks until the dust had cleared and these families had been able to bury their children and properly grieve. And I said, you know, I agree with you. Timing is everything. And said, I'll make a deal with you. If you can talk to the other side and you can convince them to stop talking about the political ramifications of this incident and stop talking about gun control and gun control legislation, I will be happy to agree to that truce. But otherwise, and I agree, I said, look, timing is everything, and the timing is now for this conversation. Now's the time when people are talking about it, so now's the time for us to make our contribution to the discussion. Focal Point, AFR Talk.